I'm Owen Jensen. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, a creative win. The Supreme Court issues rulings on religious freedom and student loans. We have a report and reaction. Fight for life. A Catholic priest learns his sentence for blocking access to an abortion business. Reaching out. The Vatican envoy wraps up his two-day trip to Russia in an effort to secure peace in Ukraine. And lights, camera, action. We hear from the producer of a new movie in the fight against human trafficking. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us. I'm Owen Jensen in for Tracy Sabol. Our top story tonight. A sharply divided U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Biden administration overstepped its authority in trying to cancel or reduce student loans for millions of Americans. Plus, another victory for religious freedom after the court rules in favor of a Colorado graphic designer who refused to create same-sex wedding websites. Correspondent Eric Rosales has more.
Good evening, Owen. Let's start with the 6-3 decision striking down the Biden administration's student debt relief program. It's news that millions of Americans did not want to hear. But some students believe that President Biden will find another way to make it happen.
I do have faith that President Biden will come to his promise of the 40 million borrowers that student debt cancellation will happen, especially with repayment starting back in October.
The court rejects the arguments that the plan was lawful under the 2003 HEROES Act law. The law says the government can provide relief to recipients of student loans when there is a national emergency like COVID. Chief Justice John Roberts says the HEROES Act language was not specific enough, writing that the court's precedent, quote, requires that Congress speak clearly before a department secretary can unilaterally alter large sections of the American economy. Senior research fellow in education policy at the Heritage Foundation, Jonathan Butcher, says the Biden administration has already placed the burden on taxpayers for other student borrowers.
The Department of Education has already made it easier for individuals with special needs to not have to pay back their loans. Individuals who work in the public sector now have much easier ways to either pay off their loans or have their loans forgiven, or again, shifted onto taxpayers.
Bottom line, the court states the administration needs Congress's endorsement before undertaking such a program. The Supreme Court also dealt a major victory for religious liberties. In a ruling rooted in free speech grounds, the justices sided with Christian business owner Lori Smith of Colorado, who refuses to create websites to celebrate same-sex weddings. It was a 6-3 decision penned by Justice Neil Gorsuch. He wrote, quote, "The First Amendment envisions the United States as a rich and complex place where all persons are free to think and speak as they wish, not as the government demands." Supporters of the Christian business owner call it a victory for all believers.
And because of the way that Lori designs her websites, it's such a creative process that really is very much expressive. It's about her beliefs. It's about the message that she's sending about the wedding, and the court was correct in affirming that.
This case is similar to the Colorado cake baker who refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple. In 2018, the justices decided in his favor as well. Outside the U.S. Supreme Court, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Today's Supreme Court rulings are both setbacks for the Biden administration. The president's student debt relief plan, which many say was too expensive and unfair, shot down. And the win for the Christian graphic artist, the president called that decision disappointing. President Joe Biden vows this fight is not over. He says his administration's student debt relief plan would have been the lifeline tens of millions of hardworking Americans needed. The president also says he's concerned the free speech case could lead to discrimination against the gay community, writing, "In America, no person should face discrimination simply because of who they are or who they love." But Republican challenger Mike Pence, who's coming off a trip to Ukraine, was quick to praise the Supreme Court in the free speech case. He writes, "Religious freedom is the bedrock of our Constitution, and today's decision reminds us that we must elect leaders who will defend that right and appoint judges who support religious freedom." Presidential candidate Tim Scott also ripped on President Biden for unfairly trying to cancel student debt.
Joe Biden wants you to pay off the student loans of lawyers and professors. I want to strengthen vocational education and apprenticeships.
The race for the White House drew several candidates to Philadelphia today. Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley both spoke to the group Moms for Liberty.
And I think what we've seen across this country in recent years has awakened the most powerful political force in this country, Mama Bears.
Moms care about a lot of things. It's not just schools. We care about the debt. We care about crime. We care about national security. We care about the border. Moms care about everything that matters that affects their families.
Moms for Liberty advocates for parental rights in education and seeks to protect students from gender ideology. It was started by 3 Florida moms who oppose COVID-19 mandates and has grown to 285 chapters across 45 states. And we go now to Andrea Picciotti-Bear, EWTN News legal analyst. Andrea, I'll get right to it. The 303 case, let's talk about that first, the creative case. So when your phone or computer screen lit up this morning and you saw that result, the ruling, your first reaction, please.
First, Owen, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's always a great joy to be with you and with your viewers. I had been kind of reading a little bit into things to suspect that this was going to be a victory for Lori Smith. And it's a clear victory for our Constitution, especially the First Amendment's guarantee of free speech. And that's something that's really important to understand, regardless of where your position is on the issue of same-sex marriage, that free speech is a bedrock principle of our government, of our Constitution, and the Supreme Court vindicated the free speech rights of Ms. Smith and other Coloradans.
What do you think this means for religious freedom and free speech overall?
I think it really does give a reminder to governments that government is not allowed to compel speech of Americans. Oftentimes, the progressive movement is to push forward ideological conformity, that everyone needs to think one way. Well, that's not the American way. And this decision, even though it's cabined in the context of Colorado's law and same-sex marriage, is a really important indicator as we move forward on issues related to gender ideology and other things that people of goodwill, Christians with traditional beliefs, just simply disagree with.
Let me read you something, Andrea, from the opinion. Very interesting, I thought this was. Equally, quote, equally, the government could force a male website designer married to another man to design websites for an organization that advocates against same-sex marriage. I thought that was very interesting.
You're right, Owen, and that's the idea behind free speech is, and you're absolutely right, the idea behind free speech is to protect all opinions, even those that are out of favor at a moment. Oftentimes we think that it's favoring one side or the other, but this decision really is going to favor all Americans in their individual right to believe, to act, and to speak consistent with those beliefs.
And I want to read one more sentence from that opinion. Quote, countless other creative professionals, too, could be forced to choose between remaining silent, producing speech that violates their beliefs, or speaking their minds and incurring sanctions for doing so. That's scary stuff.
It absolutely is. And at the same time, the Supreme Court did talk about the importance of public accommodation laws to vindicate the civil rights of Americans. So this isn't the Supreme Court backing away from our incredible advances, especially in addressing racial discrimination, but saying that these public accommodation laws can never be at the expense of other constitutional rights.
President Biden wrote in his statement, in America, no person should face discrimination simply because of who they are or who they love. The Supreme Court's disappointing decision, talking about this case, 303 Creative, undermines that basic truth, and painfully it comes during Pride Month when millions of Americans across the country join together to celebrate the contributions, resilience, and strength of the LGBTQ plus community. Your response to that statement?
With all due respect to the president, Owen, I think he just gets this case wrong. Lori Smith does not discriminate against people based on sexual orientation. She's said openly that she's happy to make websites for homosexuals, for gays, for lesbians. But what she doesn't want to do is use her creative talents to celebrate and endorse marriage that's against traditional marriage between a man and a woman. So I think that it's easy to spin the facts of this case, and we saw that with the dissenting justices in ways that just aren't true. But the Supreme Court's majority, especially this opinion written by Justice Neil Gorsuch, really did say authentically, this is about free speech and the limits on the government from compelling people to speak against their beliefs.
Let's switch gears, Andrea. Talk about the student debt. The president wanted to forgive debts for millions across the country. Would have cost something like $400 billion, I think. Either 10 or 20 grand. A lot of students would have gotten, former students. Were you surprised by that ruling?
You know, I've got to say, as the mother to several college and recent graduates from college, the idea of getting a little relief from their loan debt is something that I was definitely interested in. But the Supreme Court mentioned that this was an overreach by the Biden administration. And I think it's important for all Americans to kind of step back from our own self-interest and look at the importance of respect for the three branches of government. Here, the judiciary is coming in to check the executive, to check the Biden administration that overstepped its authority and usurped the spending powers of Congress. If Congress wants to pursue this kind of package, it should, but it can't do so surreptitiously through the executive.
Quite a whirlwind finally here. Quite a whirlwind the last couple of days. The affirmative action thing yesterday, today the student debt, and of course the 303 creative case. Anything on your radar that we should all know about as Catholics watching from at home or here in the newsroom that we should really focus on in the coming months for the court?
You know, I think, Owen, we're going to be seeing cases that continue to test the boundaries of religious freedom and of free speech. We're going to see issues related to what the court has identified as the ministerial exception, the ability of churches and church-run organizations to hire and fire people that are considered ministers for their church. Those issues are percolating up in the lower courts. Those issues are key to that important relationship between the church and society. And they're very important when it comes to the ability of church organizations to serve as that social safety net, especially for the needy and the vulnerable amongst us. It's
so critical to pay attention to because it slips away just like that. You can see it, right? Some people want to tear it away. I'll leave it at that. But Andrea Pachadi-Bear, thank you so much. As always, good to see you, and we'll check in with you later, okay?
Thanks, Owen.
All right. Moving on, the state Supreme Court in Indiana has upheld a near total ban on abortion. The measure was passed last year by Republicans. A lower court had blocked the law. Today, the justices ruled that the measure does not violate the state constitution. And in North Carolina, the Democrat governor has signed into law several revisions for new restrictions on abortion. They are set to take effect this weekend. Governor Roy Cooper initially opposed the legislation, which includes a near total ban on abortions after 12 weeks. The Republican-controlled General Assembly overrode his veto. Former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick is not competent to stand trial on criminal sexual abuse charges. The determination made by a mental health official with the state of Massachusetts. The new information could lead to the dismissal of the first criminal charges against McCarrick for assaulting a teenage boy decades ago, allegedly. He's facing a number of pending civil lawsuits as well. A Catholic priest has been sentenced to 6 months in federal prison for blocking access to a Planned Parenthood facility that's happening in New York. Father Fidelis Mashinsky was found guilty of violating the FACE Act. He had placed locks and chains on the abortion business's entrance. Father Fidelis received the maximum sentence. In a statement, he said he was not guilty of a null and void law that protects intrinsically evil and unjust acts. Well, we have a lot more to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including outreach to the Orthodox. A Greek delegation meets the Holy Father at the Vatican. And the sound of freedom. Welcome back. Protests continued in France last night following the shooting of a 17-year-old boy by police near Paris. Hundreds of people were arrested overnight. This as government officials deployed tens of thousands of police officers, at least 200 officers injured in the violent protests. French President Emmanuel Macron called the violence unacceptable. The leader of a civilian group that once kicked a drug cartel out of a state in western Mexico has been killed. Authorities say Hipólito Mora was killed after his car was ambushed by gunmen. Tributes came pouring in amid news of his death, even one from a Catholic priest who had briefly joined the fight against the cartels about a decade ago. The Vatican's peace envoy has wrapped up his two-day trip to Russia. Cardinal Matteo Zuppi is seeking a peaceful end to the war in Ukraine. This week he met with faith and government leaders. He also celebrated Mass in Moscow. The Mass took place at the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception. Earlier in the day, Cardinal Zuppi met the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. Patriarch Kirill says the two churches will work toward peace. The Vatican called the discussions fruitful. At the Vatican, the Holy Father met with a delegation from the Greek Orthodox Church. They were in Rome for the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul. The Holy Father highlighted the values of unity and peace between the churches of the East and West, adding that Catholics and Orthodox enjoy the full unity of the Holy Spirit. A Catholic artist's new sculpture on the dangers and pain caused by human trafficking has just been blessed by the Vatican Secretary of State. Let the Oppressed Go Free is the newest work by Canadian Timothy Schmaltz. It was unveiled yesterday in northern Italy. The sculpture evokes St. Josephine Bakhita and seeks to raise awareness on the global scourge of human trafficking. Earlier this week, EWTN Vatican journalist Matteo Cioffi spoke with the Canadian artist about what inspired him to create that sculpture.
Timothy Schmaltz, thank you so much for your time today. Can you tell us more about this sculpture?
Let the Oppressed Go Free, I would consider the sister of the sculpture Angels Unawares, which is installed right here in St. Peter's Square. After I created the Angels Unawares sculpture, it brings attention to the idea of welcoming to the stranger, the migrant. I was requested by Cardinal Czerny to work on another subject matter that is darker, human trafficking. And so the sculpture has St. Bakhita opening up the ground and having the modern day slaves being let free.
And I understand that during these days here in Rome, you also had the opportunity to meet Pope Francis at the end of the last general audience. How was that meeting?
It was absolutely wonderful. We brought the small model, it's just a little, like a 1 foot model for Pope Francis to bless. And I knew that he loves St. Bakhita and he's so much concerned about human trafficking in the world. So to see him with the small sculpture was just absolutely amazing. And to have it blessed was amazing too.
And this sculpture will be placed in the city of Schio, in the north of Italy. Why did you decide to place this sculpture there?
St. Bakhita is from Schio, Italy. Now that's close to Venice, and I think it is the most ideal location. It's like doing a sculpture of St. Francis for Assisi. And the hope is that this will bring focus and attention to St. Bakhita. Already that area is becoming a pilgrimage site to this saint, and this sculpture, I think, will bring more people to her.
Thank you so much.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, fishing for graces. In Peru, a unique celebration in honor of Saints Peter and Paul. Plus, we hear about a new movie inspired by a man devoted to rescuing victims of human trafficking. A new movie details the true story of a former Homeland Security agent who has devoted his life to rescuing children from human traffickers.
When God tells you what to do, you cannot hesitate.
Sound of Freedom stars Jim Caviezel. It tells the story of Tim Ballard, a government agent who quit his job to devote his life to rescuing children from sex traffickers. The movie will be released on Independence Day, July 4th. Recently, our own Tracy Sabol spoke with the movie's Catholic producer, Eduardo Verástegui.
Well, Eduardo, it's so good to be with you today. Tell us why it was important for you to make this film, and also how you came to know Tim Ballard and his story.
I met Tim Ballard 8 years ago. I met him and his friends, ex-Navy SEALs, ex-FBI agents, ex-CIA agents in Los Angeles, California. And when I learned what they were doing, when they told me what they were doing, these guys travel. They travel around the world, undercover, rescuing children who were kidnapped for sexual exploitation. And when they explained to me in details what these children are going through, the pain and the suffering of these children, of course, on one hand, I was very inspired by their work. On the other hand, I was in shock. I was depressed. I couldn't sleep for many for many days. And I remember when they look at me and they said, Eduardo, it's very sad what we are telling you, but it's more sad now that you know it if you do nothing. And I asked myself, what can I do? Because you cannot look the other way around anymore. Otherwise, you are part of the problem. When you don't know, you don't know. But now that you know, you must do something. I'm a filmmaker, I'm an actor, I have a weapon of mass instruction, and inspiration. We can raise awareness. So we have a very long conversation. I asked him a lot of questions. For example, when he told me that this is a global problem, he told me that US is the #1 consumer of child abuse, the #1 consumer of child sex, and Mexico is the #1 provider. I was in shock. And I asked him, how come if the United States is the most powerful country in the world, if you guys have the money, intelligence, technology, the army, the police, everything, how come we don't finish this problem here? And he said, because it's not a priority. Okay, how can we turn this into priority? Well, Eduardo, we are not the solution, unfortunately, to finish this problem. We are the solution for one child, for two, for three. Of course, one child, you save one child, and you save the world. We, thank God, rescue 4,000 or 5,000 children. But we are not the solution because we're talking about millions of children in the world that are kidnapped for sexual exploitation. These kids are being raped 10 to 15 times a day, and after many years, they open them and sell their organs. So we need a movement. Why? Because then we can put pressure in government so this issue can become a priority. And when it becomes a priority, then together, society, government, entertainment, news, media, we all together, we can end this terrible reality. So that's when I realized that I was called to make a movie, but not only a movie, I want to dedicate my life along with Tim and many other soldiers around the world, warriors who are not afraid to fight to eradicate child trafficking.
Yeah, very important. And I want to mention this, Jim Caviezel, devout Catholic, like yourself. He plays Tim Ballard in the movie. Tell us why he was cast.
When I was like tired of waiting for this hero actor to portray Tim Ballard, I told Tim, for some reason, these actors are not responding to your story. Who do you want to play you? And I should have started there, but I thought I wanted to surprise him with someone else, and he said, well, I would love to. Let me think about it. Yeah, just tell me who's your dream? Who do you want to play you? And he said, Jesus Christ. He said, well, I cannot afford that. I don't think he will do your. No. I'm talking about the guy who played Jesus Christ. Oh, okay. Jim Caviezel. Do you know him? He said, I know him. Let me send him a text. But he doesn't look like you. He's taller than you. He's older than you. And then he said, it doesn't matter. I'm looking not just for a great actor. I'm looking for someone that can be an ambassador of freedom, someone that can, make this film, but embrace this mission for the rest of his life. And I believe that he has that heart.
And we thank Tracy Sabol for that interview very much. In part 2 next week, Eduardo Verástegui tells us more about the role his Catholic faith plays in his work. Well, finally tonight, grab your fishing pole, a story that deals with celebrations to Saints Peter and Paul in Peru. As part of the annual day dedicated to fishermen, mementos of Saints Peter and Paul are sent out to sea. On the shore, several hundred people prayed for calm waters and a plentiful catch. We thank you very much for watching EWTN News Nightly tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Owen Jensen. Good night. Have a great weekend. God bless.